Welcome back. Last time we learned about basic operations in TypeScript, like adding numbers, combining strings, and checking conditions. Today we are going to dive into control flow, which let us make decisions in our code and perform repetitive tasks using loops. Are you ready? Then let's go. Alright, in programming, control flow allows us to dictate the order in which code is executed. This means we can make decisions, repeat actions, and create logic that adapts to different situations. We'll cover two main control flow structures today: conditional statements, which let us make decisions, and loops, which help us repeat actions. Alright, let's start with the conditional statement. The if statement, shown here, lets us perform an action only if a condition is true. So a basic one, like I've shown you here, is we have the age, which is 20, and this if statement checks if the age is equal to or greater than 18, then it prints you are an adult. So let's go inside this folder because I made two folders now. We're going to compile index.ts and we're going to node index.js. And it says you are an adult, but if it's 17, we're going to compile it again. All right, see, it prints nothing now because we changed the number to 17. It checks it's false, this boolean, because this also is a boolean, like it checks if it's greater than or equal to. If it's not, it doesn't do anything. And if it is, like we did before, so we change it back, we compile it again, and it prints you are an adult. So that is a very basic control flow. Then what we can do is, because now we don't do anything, right? So we can add another part of a direction. We can add an else statement. So if age is 18, do this, else do that. Very simple, right? If else. If this is true, do this. Otherwise, just do this. Then we're going to console log you are a minor. And we don't want to give you alcohol because you're not 18 plus, at least in Europe. You are an adult if it's 20. And now if we go 17 again, save it, compile it again, and run it, you are a minor. So that is how we added two paths to our code. This dictates where we are going to go or whatever actions are executed. So you can also add multiple flows to this. So let's just add another case for seniors. So if age is greater than 65, then we're going to console log you are a senior, and then we can do else if. And then we can indent it to the same place. So we have three cases here now. So we have age greater than or equal to 65, you are a senior, greater than equal to 18, you're an adult, or you are a minor. So that's basically what we've done here. So now let's compile it again and go to like 67, save it and run it. It says you're a senior. If we go anywhere else, it shows either one of these three cases. So using else if allows us to check multiple conditions in sequence. Here, if the age is 65 or older, we classify them as senior. If that's not true, we check if they're 18, and otherwise we check if they are a minor. Now let's go a bit further. We're going to go for loops. Let's look at a for loop. Loops let us repeat actions multiple times without writing the same code over and over. TypeScript has two main types of loops, for and while. So we're going to check the for loop first. A for loop is very simple. Let us repeat a block of code a specific number of times. So here's the basic structure of it, shown here. It says let y is 0 while y smaller than 5, increment y, and keep doing whatever you're doing. In this case, it's console logging the iteration number. I put it in the comments here what it does. I is 0, initializes our loop counter, I, and starts at 0. While I is smaller than 5, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's the condition where it will be true. The loop will continue as long as it's less than 5, right? And every time it finishes a sequence, it increments the counter. So after the first time, instead of 0, it will be 1, then it will be 2. So that is what it does. So let's run it real quick. Let's comment this and let's run the code. All right. So what you can see here is it ran 5 times, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We always start at 0 in a programming world. We don't start at 1, we start at 0. Get used to it. Very important that you get used to it. Never start at 1. It doesn't work like that. It works from 0. That is how a for loop works. It's very simple. You just say, okay, I'm going to initialize the variable here like we've initialized variables before. It starts at 0 while this condition is true. So in this case, it's y smaller than 5. Increment the counter every time after. So that's the 3 parts that you see here. It's also documented here if you want to check it later on. Now we have a while loop. A while loop is actually a bit different. The while loop repeats as long as a condition is true. Here's a quick example. So we have a countdown, that's 5. While the countdown is greater than 0, we are going to console log countdown and decrement it. So we have 5, and every time this gets changed, so every time the block of code gets executed here, it's going to decrement the countdown, and then eventually it stops looping this like it did here. See, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then we have liftoff, because at that point it's bigger than or it's 0, so it's not bigger than 0. It cuts, it breaks out of the while loop, and then it console logs liftoff. It's very important while using while loops that you make sure that you don't create an infinite loop, except if you're making video games. If you're making video games, you might want an eternal running loop, but we don't want that in the usual programs. So make sure that it actually sometimes somewhere turns false. Otherwise, you have a memory leak with something running all the time. Because you can also do while true, and this will just keep going until my computer basically runs out of memory. So be sure and be wary of that and know that it can happen. So that is a while loop, very simple. It just keeps doing this part of the code until this condition is false. So when do you use a for loop and when do you use a while loop? Generally, if you know how many times you need to loop, you use a for loop. If you need to repeat something until a specific condition is met and you don't know how many iterations it will take, a while loop is usually a better choice. That is the difference between these two. Now, there's also, because these are very basic, right? These basic for loops and while loops, they have other types of loops available in TypeScript, but we'll get to that later. These are the main loops that you need to know to understand programming. There's also a simpler one because usually loops are used on arrays. Let's say we have an array of data, let's say names, and it's Alice, it's Bob, and it's John. TypeScript also has some nice syntactic sugar to just for each over that. It's a bit simpler. For each name, we're going to console.log name. So now if we know that we have an array, usually what it does here is it says names.length. So for the length of the names array, it runs that specific piece of code. So that's the amount of iterations. But we rarely use for loops in modern code because usually you loop over an array of something. That's where you encounter the for each loop. Now I'm going to save this and run it again. See? So it prints Alice, Bob, and John. Let's go to the practice exercises. So for the exercises, number 1, check all of these and pause the video here, read through them, and then we're going to go to the answers. Number one is create an if statement that checks if a temperature variable is greater than 30. If it is, print it's hot outside. Otherwise, print it's a nice day. So we have a temperature that's 25. We just defined the variable here. It's 25. If the temperature is greater than 30, it's hot outside. Else, it's a nice day. All right, the second one, write a for loop that prints the numbers 1 to 10. For let I is 1. Here we start at 1. Why? We don't want to start at 0. We changed it from 0 to 1 because we want to print numbers 1 to 10. Usually you start at 0. Otherwise, you'd have to do like y++. y++. What this does is it just increments it. If you would start at 0 and you would go smaller than 9. But for this case, we just took 1, as it might be a bit simpler to read, from 1 smaller than or smaller or equal to 10, console log it, and that will do it. And then the third one is create a while loop that starts with a variable fuel set to 3 and decreases fuel by 1 each time it loops. When fuel reaches 0, print out of fuel. So what we're doing here is we have defined a variable fuel, which is a number 3, while fuel is bigger than 0, we're going to console log fuel level, which will go 3 to 1, and then we're out of fuel. Here it decrements it, so it eventually becomes a false statement, which will cut us out of this loop. If this would not be here, we could just keep on looping forever until my computer runs out of memory. And as you can see, what we have done here is we have printed "it's a nice day." And if it's above 30, so if we change this variable, we can check if it will actually print "it's hot outside," which we can do. So let's do it. So you guys just see that it does work. And now it's hot outside, right? It's a nice day and it's hot outside. This one actually prints all the numbers from 1 to 10, and this one goes from 3 to 1, and we're out of fuel. So that's it. That is the most simple versions of loops, or check for decision-making points in your logic. So we learned how to use if statements for decisions, for loops to repeat code a fixed number of times, and while loops for conditions that don't have a set number of iterations. And in the next episode, we are going to dive into functions, which lets us organize and reuse our code more efficiently. Don't miss it. You see it here, so make sure to subscribe and hit the bell button to know when new episodes will arrive. Have a great day, happy coding, and see you next time.